Nobody satisfying your request for was satisfying your ready for what Jasmine Crockett did on live television. She didn't shout. She didn't throw insults. She didn't try to match the most dominant political personality in modern American history on his own terms. She just sat down, opened her mouth, and calmly dismantled him piece by piece while he fell apart in real time right next to his wife. And the silence from Melania? That might have been the loudest part of all. The studio was running hot, not just warm, hot. The kind of heat that comes from too many overhead lights burning at full power for too long. The kind that makes foreheads shine under camera lenses and forces everyone on set to sit a little straighter just to keep themselves from wilting. The air inside the room carried that heavy electric weight that only shows up when everyone already knows something big is about to happen. But nobody knows exactly what shape it's going to take. Cameras were locked in position. 3 in front, 2 on the sides, 1 sweeping wide for audience reactions. Monitors glowed behind the production wall, each one showing a different angle of the same stage. Crew members moved quietly between stations, adjusting levels, checking feeds, speaking in low voices through headsets. Everything about the setup looked standard, professional, routine, but nothing about the energy in that room felt routine. It felt like the moment before a match is lit in a room that's already been filled with gasoline. Donald Trump was already seated when the segment began. He sat the way he always sits in these moments, shoulders wide, chin lifted slightly, body angled just enough to project ownership of the space around him. His suit was sharp, his tie pulled tight, his expression carrying that familiar half-smile that walks the thin line between confidence and challenge. He looked like a man who had already decided how this was going to go. A man who had walked into 100 rooms like this one and walked out of every single one feeling like he had won, whether he had or not. Beside him, Melania Trump sat perfectly still. Her posture was flawless, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her face composed into an expression so carefully neutral it could have been carved from marble. She gave away nothing, no warmth, no tension, no anticipation, just stillness, the kind that doesn't invite questions but doesn't answer them either. The cameras caught her briefly in the opening shots, then moved on, not knowing yet how important that stillness was going to become. The audience was buzzing, that low, anticipatory hum that fills a studio when people can feel the stakes before anyone has spoken a word. Seats were full, phones were down, eyes were forward. Everyone expected what they always expected from a segment like this. Volume, interruptions, sharp exchanges. The usual theater of political combat, where the loudest voice usually wins, and the audience picks sides based on who lands the best punch. But what they got was something nobody in that room had prepared for. Jasmine Crockett leaned toward the microphone, and from the very first syllable, the atmosphere shifted. Not with a shout, not with a dramatic opening line designed to grab attention through force, with something far more unsettling. Calm, total, measured, deliberate calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from being relaxed. The kind that comes from being ready. Completely, thoroughly, surgically ready. She didn't rush. That was the first thing everyone noticed. In a format designed for speed, for quick exchanges, for verbal jabs thrown and returned before the audience has time to think, she moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who had already mapped out every sentence, every pause, every breath before she ever sat down in that chair. Her voice was steady, pitched low enough to demand attention without raising volume, clear enough to cut through any background noise without effort. She started with dates, then decisions, then names, then consequences, each one placed carefully on top of the last, like stones being laid into a foundation that was being built in full view of everyone watching. There was no wasted language, no filler, no dramatic throat-clearing or emotional warm-up. Just facts, arranged in order, delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this not for performance, but for accuracy. The room grew quieter with every line. You could feel it happening in real time, that strange gravitational pull that occurs when an entire audience collectively realizes they're hearing something different from what they expected. The usual noise of a television studio, the coughs, the rustling, the whispered side conversations, all of it drained away until the only sound was her voice and the low electrical hum of equipment running overhead. The cameras stayed on her longer than expected. The director must have felt it too, that instinct that tells you the story is happening in one place and you need to stay there. They caught the calm in her face, the steadiness in her eyes, the complete absence of hesitation in every word she spoke. This was not performance. This was not someone delivering rehearsed lines for maximum dramatic effect. This was preparation. Deep, thorough, undeniable preparation. And that made it far more dangerous than anything loud could have been. Trump tried anyway. At first, it was subtle. The familiar scoff, a slight shake of the head, a dismissive wave of the hand, like someone brushing away a fly they don't consider worth the effort of actually swatting. Then a muttered line, half under his breath, something about fake accusations and political garbage. The usual tools, the ones that had worked 1,000 times before, the ones that threw opponents off balance, forced them into shouting matches, pulled them into his rhythm where he controlled the tempo and the rules. But Crockett barely reacted. She paused. Not a long pause, just long enough for the room to hear his interruption, register it, and understand that she had heard it too. Then she continued from the exact same point, in the exact same tone, without a single adjustment to her rhythm or her volume, as if the interruption had been a gust of wind that passed through the room and moved nothing. That was the moment the mood changed for real, because it was no longer about what Trump was saying. It was about the fact that his tactics were not working, and the more they failed, the more visible his frustration became. She kept laying out her timeline, point by point, detail by detail, each one connected to the last with the kind of logical precision that leaves no room for misinterpretation. She talked about decisions made behind closed doors. She talked about public statements that contradicted private actions. She talked about patterns, not isolated incidents, but repeating patterns, the kind that only become visible when someone takes the time to line everything up in sequence and show the audience the shape that emerges. Trump shifted in his chair. He adjusted his jacket. He leaned in, then leaned back. His jaw tightened, the muscles along the sides of his face pulling visibly beneath the skin. His smile was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was strain, the kind of expression that appears when someone is trying to look unbothered while their entire body is broadcasting the opposite. The audience could see it. The cameras absolutely could. Every twitch, every adjustment, every forced expression was being captured in high definition and broadcast to millions of people who were watching the gap between the image and the reality widen in real time. And beside him, Melania remained silent, hands folded, face composed, offering no visible defense, no nod of agreement, no supportive glance, no expression strong enough to interrupt what the viewers were already starting to notice. Just silence. Perfect, unreadable, devastating silence. Then came the moment that split the segment in half. Crockett slowed down, not dramatically, just enough for the audience to feel the gear shift, to sense that everything up until now had been the approach, and what was coming next was the arrival. She looked directly ahead, her eyes fixed on a point just past the camera lens, and said the real issue was never just the public image, not just the polished appearances and the carefully staged moments and the practiced smiles. The real issue, she said, was what had been hidden beneath all of it, the pattern of decisions that never made it into speeches, the private efforts that never appeared in photo ops, the behind-the-scenes damage control that ran constantly, quietly, invisibly, while the public-facing machinery kept projecting strength and unity and control. She said the American people had been sold a story, a clean, polished, professional story about discipline and leadership and unshakable partnership. But the truth, according to everything she had seen, was far more fragile than that story allowed, and far more damaging than anyone sitting on that stage had been willing to admit. That was when Trump snapped. He leaned forward so hard the chair seemed to shift beneath him. His hand cut through the air between them like a blade. His voice rose fast, too fast, jumping from measured to aggressive in the space of a single breath. He called the whole thing a disgrace. He said it was lies. He said it was grandstanding. He said the entire setup was rigged against him, the way everything was always rigged against him, the way every question was always unfair, every critic was always dishonest, every moment that didn't go his way was always someone else's fault. The words came out hot, fast, tangled together at the edges. What had started as irritation was now something else entirely. This was anger breaking through the surface. Real anger, the kind that doesn't care about cameras or optics or strategy, the kind that just needs to get out. But Crockett did not speed up, did not retreat, did not lean back or look away or give any sign that the outburst had changed anything about her plan. She simply waited, hands still, face still, eyes still. She let the outburst happen the way you let a wave crash against a wall, knowing the wall will still be standing when the water pulls back. And when the noise faded, when Trump's voice dropped and his breath came a little faster, and the room hung in that strange suspended silence that follows an explosion, she resumed, from the exact same point, in the exact same tone, with the exact same rhythm, as if nothing had happened at all. The contrast was devastating. His volume made her calm look like armor. Her steadiness made his frustration look like fracture. The audience felt it immediately. There was no big cheer, no easy laughter, no quick release of tension through applause, just that heavy, loaded dead silence that only happens when a room full of people collectively realizes they are watching someone lose control in real time, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. Trump tried again, louder this time, harder, his voice cutting across hers with the force of someone who has spent a lifetime believing that whoever speaks loudest wins. But the effect was worse. Each interruption made him look less like a man rebutting an argument and more like a man trying to stop a leak with his bare hands while the water kept rising. His face tightened, his gestures grew wider, more exaggerated, arms sweeping through the air as if trying to physically push her words away. His sentences started losing their shape, ideas colliding with each other before either one could finish. Meanwhile, Crockett kept going, returning again and again to the same careful sequence, the same measured pace, the same steady voice, like someone laying bricks while a storm raged around her, each brick placed with the same care as the last, each one fitting perfectly against the one before, each one making the structure a little taller, a little stronger, a little harder to ignore. And through all of it, Melania said nothing. That silence became its own story. The cameras kept returning to her, searching her face for something, any sign that she was about to intervene, about to defend, about to echo her husband's fury, or at least acknowledge it. But there was nothing. Not coldness, not defiance, not agreement, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't explain itself and doesn't need to. And somehow, impossibly, that silence made everything heavier. It added a dimension to the scene that no one had planned for. Trump looked increasingly isolated in his own anger, like a man standing in the middle of a room where the walls had quietly moved away from him without anyone announcing it. The room had split into 3 parts, and everyone watching could see the division as clearly as if someone had drawn lines on the floor. Crockett with the facts, Trump with the fury, and Melania with a silence that nobody could quite explain but everybody could feel. Crockett seemed to understand exactly what that silence was doing to the room. Instead of acknowledging it, instead of pointing to it or drawing attention to it in any way that might have felt theatrical, she simply let it exist alongside everything else she was building. She repeated key details. She restated the central point. She said the American people were exhausted, not angry, not outraged, exhausted, tired of watching polished appearances cover deeper problems, tired of public theater hiding private damage, tired of watching the same machine deny everything while the cracks grew wider and harder to cover with every passing week. She talked about ordinary people. People who were hungry in a country that kept being told everyone was doing fine. People who watched billions flow in directions they couldn't trace while being told to trust the process. People who heard the words, "Everybody's going to be in good shape," and looked around at their own lives and couldn't find the shape being described. She never had to shout. By then, the room was already listening to her more closely than it was listening to him. The gravitational center of the entire segment had shifted so completely that Trump's reactions, which had once filled every corner of the frame, now felt like noise happening at the edges of something more important. And his reactions only made it worse. He shook his head so hard it looked almost theatrical, a performance of disagreement so exaggerated it crossed the line from emphasis into something closer to desperation. He muttered lines under his breath, then louder, then loud enough for the microphones to catch fragments that only confirmed what the audience was already seeing. He tried sarcasm. He tried mockery. He tried the brute force approach of simply talking over her, filling the air with so many words that hers would have nowhere to land. Nothing worked. Every tactic that normally bent a room toward him was failing, one by one, like locks clicking open on a door he was trying to keep shut. The image forming on screen was not one of dominance. It was not one of control. It was one of unraveling, visible, undeniable, real-time unraveling. And for a man who had built an entire political identity around the projection of absolute dominance, that was the most damaging thing that could possibly happen on live television. By the final stretch, Crockett had completely transformed the atmosphere in that studio. What had started as another high-voltage television clash, another round of political theater designed for clips and commentary and next-day headlines, now felt like something closer to an exposure. Not because she had screamed him down, not because she had delivered some flashy one-liner designed to go viral before the segment even ended, but because she had refused, absolutely and completely refused, to lose her footing while he visibly lost his. Her composure had become the story. His reaction had become the proof. When she finished, there was no immediate roar from the audience, no explosion of applause, no standing ovation, and that was the most telling part of all, because it meant the audience was not reacting with entertainment. They were processing. Some looked stunned, mouths slightly open, hands motionless in their laps. Some leaned back in their chairs as if they had just been shown something heavier than they had prepared themselves to carry. Some stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, still replaying the contrast in their minds. The calm and the chaos, the precision and the panic, the woman who never raised her voice, and the man who couldn't stop raising his. Trump sat there, visibly agitated, jaw clenched, hands gripping the armrests of his chair, trying to gather back the authority that had slipped from his grasp like water through open fingers. The confidence that had been there at the beginning, that squared shoulder, chin-up certainty that he owned the room, was gone. What remained was something rawer, something smaller, something that looked far more like a man sitting in the wreckage of a moment he had expected to control and watching the pieces settle around him in patterns he couldn't rearrange. And Melania remained poised, still, silent, her expression unchanged from the first frame to the last. But her silence lingered in the room like an unanswered question that no one had the courage to ask out loud. That was what made the whole thing unforgettable. Not just the words themselves, though they were devastating. Not just the facts, though they were damning. But the way it all landed. The architecture of the moment. Calm against chaos. Precision against deflection. One person refusing to be rattled, while another grew more visibly desperate with every passing minute to seize back a moment that had already slipped beyond his reach. On live television, with nowhere to hide and no edit to save him and no commercial break to reset the frame, Donald Trump looked less like the master of the stage and more like a man trapped inside a moment he could not control, surrounded by a silence he could not fill, and facing a calmness he could not crack. By the time the cameras started to pull back, widening the frame to show the full stage one final time, the damage had already been done. It was already spreading. The clips would move across the internet within minutes. The reactions would explode across every platform before the studio lights even cooled. Viewers would replay the pauses, the interruptions, the expressions, the silence, over and over, finding new details each time, seeing something they missed the first watch, feeling the weight of the contrast settle deeper with every replay. Supporters would try to spin it, critics would call it a collapse, analysts would debate the tactics, the strategy, the implications for weeks, but almost everyone watching, regardless of where they stood, would agree on one undeniable thing. Jasmine Crockett did not need to overpower Donald Trump. She did not need to outshout him or outperform him or beat him at his own game. She only had to stay calm long enough for him to overpower himself. And that is exactly what happened. If this satisfies your moment, left you speechless, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. These are not just political clashes. They are the moments where power reveals its true shape when the performance finally cracks. Drop a comment and tell us which part you'll remember the longest. And stay close, because the next one cuts deeper than anything you've seen so far.